Howdy y'all, I'm Sam Moses, and hopefully you are here for the easy ways to make my job harder. I'm a pen tester, so this is a pen tester's perspective on internal network security. As I said, I'm Sam Moses. I work at Rapid7. I'm a cybersecurity consultant there, focused on penetration testing. Been doing that for about 4 years. Also did pen testing in my previous positions where I worked at BYU and also as a student. I presented both nationally and internationally on different variety of cybersecurity topics. And yeah, as I said, before Rapid7, I worked at BYU. I noticed some BYU people in the audience. Oh, hey, even more BYU people in the audience than I noticed before. And yeah, so I'm a nerd all the way through sci-fi, fantasy, got my dog, play D&D. Currently, I am a Dragonborn monk, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, that's basically me. So for this talk, I'm going to be talking about, go through and kind of talk about the first common path that I use to exploit internal networks. And then I'm going to individually break it out into pieces and talk about the recommendations or remediation recommendations for that. And then I'm going to do the same thing with another common attack vector, and then talk about some variations with security in depth and how that would work. So diving in, first common attack vector, man-in-the-middle attack, where LLM NAR is enabled on the network. So LLM NAR, or link local multicast name resolution, I always have to read it and make sure it's in my notes because I never actually remember it. I always just call it LLM NAR. It's a legacy auxiliary name resolution service for Windows. And it's used to resolve host names before DNS. And so that's part of the reason why it's legacy. Systems configured to use it, it actually broadcasts out name resolution requests. And so using that, we can sniff and then poison those requests and actually catch credentials. Then I take those credentials and I use that in an SMB relay attack. SMB is server message block. It's widely used for sharing files, SMB shares, printers, various port services and stuff. So it's used in a lot of different ways, especially on Windows Active Directory domains and everything. And so it's a common attack vector that we use. And so once I have the creds with man-in-the-middle attack, I could then use the SMB relay to then relay those credentials. And more often than not, I use just the default settings because I'm curious what will happen. And one of the times on one of the machines, the creds that I relay has local admin access. At that point in time, I have control over that box. And having control over that box gives me access to multiple different things. And so having control of that box allows me to dump the LSA. Which then allows me to check to see if there's potentially plain text creds. And more than once, actually multiple times this year, I found plain text domain admin credentials. And at that point in time, it's all over. That simple. One of the times this year, I had DA in less than an hour. And that was because I had to let my dog out, and she took a long time. Probably could have been faster. Anyways, so first step, man in the middle. So the tool that I normally use for this is Responder. If you don't know it, it's a fun tool. Look it up. It's great. So as I mentioned, LLM NAR, there's also, if you notice there, MBNS. MBNS is another legacy system. I feel like I see LLM and NAR more. That's the reason why I used LLM and NAR as the main focus of this, because like I said, this is the common attack vectors. But MBNS, or NetBIOS name service, same exact thing. It's a legacy auxiliary name resolution service before DNS. So being able to run Responder, I'm literally just poisoning the network, looking for those requests, and once I'm sniffing and hitting those requests, it's sending a response back. And so that way I can get them to send those credentials that they are trying to find to my system. And so by doing this, I can catch credentials. Oop, I hit too many buttons. Where am I? Right spot? Yeah. Yeah. So catch lots of credentials. The most common one that I end up catching is SMB credentials, because SMB is used a ton on the network for logging on machines, connecting to services, connecting to file shares. And so it focuses on setting up various rogue servers to connect to SMB. It also does structured query language. I actually had one that I actually got SQL creds for this last year, but normally it's SMB creds that I'm seeing and being able to use. And so once I have the creds, well, start off, remediation for LLM&R. Turn it off. It's legacy. You don't need it. There's no reason to really have it running. Same thing with MBNS. I have notes there on how to turn it off. You can also Google that, but I made sure to put these. The remediation steps are, we're going to be a little more text heavy in case anyone wants to take pictures or anything. Also, if you ask me for, I will just email you these slides. So this is something that will stop me from being able to get hashes. While I'm saying hashes, and before I was saying creds, part of the reason for that is sometimes if things aren't configured properly, you can catch plain text credentials too, which makes it real nice and real sweet. Generally speaking, though, it is configured right, and so it is hashes you're catching. So, a gotcha warning. So, before disabling LLM&R and MBNS, make sure all your systems are configured to run DNS, and LLM&R and MBNS is not being relied on. Chances are that is the case. But double check, because otherwise you're going to do this and it's going to break everything, and you don't want that. So double check that before you start turning things off right away, and make sure that everything is properly configured to run DNS before you start turning things off. But the moment you do this, from my perspective, it makes my job harder. So now that we're running the poisoning attack, we're catching credential hashes and things like that, I set up an SMB relay attack. So SMB relay, like I said, it's connecting and doing everything. There are lots of ways to find whether a system has SMB signing or not turned off. So most systems, SMB signing is default disabled. That makes it great for me. There are other messages that I have highlighted here. Message signing enabled but not required. As a hacker, that is the same thing as disabled to me. If it's not required, I'm just going to skip the requirement. There's no reason for me to go through a requirement if it's not required. So those are basically the same thing to me when I see them, and I can go and find those by running, it's an nmap script for that one. There's two SMB security modes. Again, Google, Verifriend. I think it's literally SMB-security mode and then SMB security 2-security mode, but anyways, Google, friend. I actually, generally speaking, use crapmapexec instead to do it. Responder also has a good tool with it called runfinger. Makes it sound a little dirty, but basically it fingers the host and lets you know information about it. But yeah, SMB signing, as long as it is disabled or not required, I can then use NTML relay. It's in the IM packet. Another great tool to set it up so that when responder captures poison hashes, I can then forward it to those services that do not have SMB signing required, and I can catch hashes. You will notice that the hashes are not blurred. All the ones that are not blurred, I pulled from proper sources online. The ones that are blurred, I could not find and made those myself. So if you're wondering about that, those are fine. They're kosher. So yeah. NTML relay, I'm relaying those, and I gain access to the machine. It's great. If it's set up properly, then I will not be able to do that because SMB signing would be required. Which leads me to the way to fix it. Configure your Windows system so that it is enabled and required. I've seen companies have like all their systems enabled but not required. Again, it's basically the same thing to me. And so if it needs to be enabled and required, you can actually do it through group policy, which makes it nice. You can push it all out. Look it up, because these are just some of the basic notes, but there are more in-depth notes of walking you through the steps and everything, of course. Another gotcha warning, though. Make sure that enabling digitally signed SMB requests won't break anything. Check all your SMB servers to make sure they support SMB signing. They should. Samba servers as well, you can have them enforce SMB signing as well. So it's not purely Windows. If you got some Linux systems working with SMB as well, you can enforce it through Samba. So yeah, as long as it is enabled and required, I can't forward creds, I can't use them that way. And then, yeah, user has local admin access. So once I default in packets into YAML relay, it will try to dump the SAM. And so often if I'm seeing enough creds passing through, I will, instead of trying to set up a proxy and everything, be like curiously just let it run and see like, okay, are any of these gonna hit and be able to dump the SAM? I am surprised how many times I actually get a SAM. And then and the nice thing about those type of hashes are they are passable hashes. And so it goes back to the basic principles. Review your roles and your organization and principal least privilege, which sometimes can be difficult, especially like, if you haven't done least privilege principle for a while, you might need to audit a bunch of user roles, which sucks. But it is very important to get done and actually secure the network and keep everything proper. Also, if you can, requiring two-factor authentication on some of the more secure stuff can definitely help with that too. So yeah, I think that's it for this one. I don't think there's another one. Yeah, so yeah, review access controls, assign privileges based on those roles, all the basic same least privilege stuff. I really should check my notes more, but I just keep going, that's fine. Okay, so once I do that, so as you saw before on this one, great administrator hash there for the local admin, so I can take that, and more often than not, also on this one, see, this is why I don't look at my notes, because I know more than my notes. So with the local admin hash, something else I probably should have included in here, but I didn't include in my screenshots or anything, is do not use the same local admin on multiple hosts. More often than not, if I get local admin on one host, I take those admin creds, test it against all the other hosts, maybe some that even don't have SMB signing disabled and maybe do require it. It doesn't matter then. I got a patchable admin hash. I can start popping those boxes that have the same local admin. And so specifically a test that's coming to mind right now, they only had like 8 hosts that did not require SMB signing. I got forwarded, one of them was local admin hash, and then I used that local admin hash to then pop 12 more boxes, pop, pwn, take control of, have admin root access. And so I was able to then from those, so sometimes there's a little bit of steps in between, sometimes it's not the same box, you're getting all that stuff, but in those 12 additional ones, I dumped the LSA and I got plain text credentials for a domain admin. And at that point in time, it's game over. So LSA, local security authority, secrets, it's in the Windows registry, it's where sensitive security policy and information is stored, and it does store plain text passwords. So how do you fix that? There might be a way out there to kind of resolve the plain text LSA. Honestly, I'm not sure. But again, it goes back to least privilege. Do you need that type of account logging in that way? So the first recommendation is limit local admin access. If they can't access it, then it's not really a problem. The other recommendation is limit the impact of the compromise. Windows does weird stuff sometimes that you either have to break it or do other things to make it be more proper. And so one of the things to do is to limit that. You can limit domain accounts in local services. There's probably not a local services you need to use. And then when you do need to connect to those local services, create specific domain accounts for that local service and remove all unnecessary privileges. So they're only connecting with that service. And so that means that, yeah, you can maybe go hit services with it with other things, but you won't actually be able to get any more access. You won't be able to look up anything else. It limits the ability to actually be able to do anything with it. Okay, so review of this is the attack path we just went through. Man in the middle attack, LMNR enabled, or MBNS. With that being poisoned, it gets me the SMB relay. Being able to relay that then gets me local admin access. And if I have local admin access and then plain text DA in the LSA, which again, limiting services, there should not be a domain admin account in the LSA connecting through that. But through that, we've been compromising, we as in company Rapid7, multiple companies by doing this same exact attack path, which very quickly. Sometimes there's little steps in between trying to figure out how to make it work for their network and different things. But more often than not, using this attack vector, we can get DA within the first day of the engagement. Okay. Second attack path. Windows null sessions, you enumerate users, so you get a bunch of users. Null sessions is when you're logging in with a blank username and a blank password. So by using both of those, and you're going through and doing a null session with Windows, you can enumerate a lot of information, including users. The nice thing is, normally you can also get the password policy, which makes it a lot easier to password spray and do things with that too. Which then you password spray with all those usernames, and if the user has a weak password, then you then all of a sudden gain access to the domain, and once you have access to the domain, one of the popular attack vectors we've been using lately is Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS attack, which I'll be going into more detail later down. But basically, by doing an ADCS attack, you get back a domain hash that is a passable hash, and then you have, domain admin hash, which is a passable hash, and then you have access to the whole entire domain again. So, Windows null session enumerating. What I normally use for this is enum for Linux. Great tool, makes it easy. And you can enumerate a bunch of users. There are other ways to enumerate users. I will talk more on that when I'm talking about variations of things. I use this example because, again, going through most of common, at least a handful of internals I did this year had at least one system that allowed null sessions and gave me, even if it's not all the usernames, enough usernames that I could start doing things with it and get further access. And password policy, very nice, very clear, shows a lot of the information and everything in there. It's fantastic. So, null sessions. You can disable anonymous and null sessions in your Windows servers, especially your domain controllers who has all the information in the domain, which means that someone won't be able to enumerate all the users in the domain and then be able to start password spraying against them and get further access. Again, for those of you who want to, screenshot there or talk to me after and I can send these to you. But you can do that in group policy as well to disable. There's multiple different settings you have to do. It's not just a simple one to make sure you're disabling all the different features and everything. Because sometimes I've gone in and there's been more than once that I go in and they've disabled some stuff with null sessions, but they haven't disabled everything. And so it's limits some of the information I can get, but it's still enough that I can start proceeding and going forward and continue getting more and more information and enumerating more in the network. Password spraying. So one of the things that we do in our kickoff engagements when we're talking to clients is I ask them what their lockout policy is. The reason for this is not just so I can be malicious and password spray and not cause any, and be able to get more information. The main reason is if I don't know, I will attempt and potentially lock out lots of people on your network. We don't want to do that. We are a red team. We are your friends. We want to work with you and help you find these things that help you secure you more down the line. So we always ask what the lockout policy is so we can stay below that and not cause a disruption to services. We're human. If we do, accidentally forget to remove duplicates in a name, don't get too upset. Cough, cough, never happened to me. So yeah. And if they have a weak password policy, or even if they have a good password policy, but their users aren't taught how to do good passwords, and so they still can slip in weak passwords, then we can spray and we can easily get a password, especially if you have a large organization with over 2,000 people, and let's say your lockout policy is pretty good and you only allow 3 incorrect attempts until it's locked out. If I got 2,000 people I can run 1 password against, or 2 if I'm feeling gutsy, that's 2,000 guesses on people's accounts, whether there's the password or not. That's still a lot. And that's the difference between a spray versus a brute force. A brute force is 1 account and I'm hitting it all the time with all these different passwords. Spray 1, 2, 3 attempts depending on the password policy, and I can hit those 2,000, 200, whatever it is employees, and then that's still multiple guesses that I'm making, giving me closer and closer to getting a potential right one. So, while I mentioned the lockout policy and I stay under it, the lockout policy does help. Whether it's 5, 3, obviously the smaller the better, but you want to stay usability too. You don't want someone to, 1 incorrect attempt, it locks you out. People are going to get frustrated. You need to make sure you're pairing usability with your security. 3, I'd say, is a pretty reasonable amount. I've seen 5. 5 just makes it easier for me to do more guesses. But have a good lockout policy. It does limit it. Otherwise, I'd just be spraying all day long and giving more and more chance of being able to get proper creds. But alerting is the most proper way to go for catching these types of attacks. If you see a single IP attempting multiple login attempts across multiple different accounts in a short period of time, that's something you need to start setting up alerts around. And so that's the best way to catch this. And then you can know and then respond rather than locking people out too much too, potentially, and causing issues that way. So alerting really is the best way to go for this type of attack vector with password sprays. So password spray, this kind of ties into the last one, un momento. I feel like in both common attack vectors, part of it boils down to the basics, like the other one was principal least privilege. This one is weak password. I'm not going to harp on this too much. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on this one. Password strength depends on how easy it is to guess. Season and the date is still very, very common. But a good 12-character length password, including uppercase, lowercase, digits, special characters, it's all the same stuff. Admins, at least 16 creds, just to be a little more secure. Not 16 creds, sorry, 16 characters. The other thing with this too, which I don't know which one's the best one to bring this up with, but I'll just say it now. Separating your regular account from your domain admin account is also a recommendation that we have too. I don't think I included that one in the slides. If you are a domain user, not everything you need to, if you are a domain admin, not everything you need to do is as a domain admin. When I was a system admin, I had 2 different accounts. One when I would need to do admin work, one that I needed to do more regular work. Maybe with a little bit more privileges because you are doing work and things. But I kept those accounts separate with different passwords to help avoid, because if you're using the one that isn't domain admin for most of your work, even if they get it, yes, they will have access to more stuff than you want them to have access to, but they won't have access to the full domain yet. Separations like that can really help secure your network. But yeah, forgot to include that one in the slides. The other one is use an enterprise password database. Users are lazy, and honestly, I can't blame them. How many of us have written a short little script or something to make our job easier? Because we are lazy. I call it efficient, but different people. So, enterprise password database. If you make that, they can have one really good, strong password with really strong requirements, and then you can have them auto-generate all their other passwords and random secure. I mean, you can have good technical controls over that to make sure that they're having good passwords and everything like that. And so by doing that, it goes beyond just the training. It's like, make sure you have a good password you can type in on this, and then you can have a password database so they don't have to remember 20 million passwords. Because if I had to remember 20 passwords, I would be trying to find easy ways to remember them, which is going to decrease the security. We need to pair usability with security when we're doing these things, and the password database is a good way to do that. And so at this point, we've enumerated users. we've password sprayed, and because there was weak passwords, we were able to guess the user's password. So now comes the ADCS attack. So the nice thing about ADCS attack from my side is that it's a non-privileged domain user. They don't really need any extra privilege or anything. And then I can run a petit potome. That's another great attack vector and great tool to use. And you can send that attack to the domain controller, and it will return an NTLM hash. Un momento. Sticking introverts up here and talking is way too much. Active Directory Certificate Services, for those of you who don't know what it is, it provides PKI, or a public key infrastructure, for private networks, and it can be issued to trusted certificates and managed devices and things like that. And then it can get tied into Active Directory Domain Services, which is where it comes Active Directory Certificate of Services. It's the combination of those two. And so when it does that, these authentication method, it can be enterprise CA Certificate Authority. But the misconfiguration of that, which lots and lots of misconfigured ADCS out there in the world, can allow a malicious actor to gain domain-wide privilege escalation. So, the next step of the attack, after I do the whole petit potome, and this is me confirming that the NTML hash is actually properly coming back. That's responder that I showed you guys before. We then send that and enumerate the Active Directories, the certificate authority certificates, and I'm looking for information. The main one that I've used, again, there's lots of different ones, but the main one that's being exploited most that I've seen today is ESC8. It's web enrollment's enabled, and it requests a certain disposition, so I'm looking for one running ESC8. The nice thing is, with these tools, Certify is the one that I'm forwarding the NTML hash with to get the information. It will print out which ones are vulnerable, like there at the bottom, but also if you have to do it a more manual way as well, you could just check for web enrollment being enabled and request disposition is issue. And so looking through and finding all the information is basically what you're looking for. I'm trying to make sure. Yeah. And so at this point, now we know the petit potome command works. We got the CA configuration, and we found one that should be vulnerable. And so now we need to actually exploit it. Yeah, one more step actually. So once you know that it is exploitable, I'm going to look through all the ones that are exploitable, and I'm looking for it to be enabled, but also for the enrollment rights there at the bottom, because I want one that is enrolled on domain controllers. The reason for that is because the certificate authority and the thing that we're trying to get from that is going to be a private key, which when it's set up with ADCS, can be used to actually log into things as an alternative way to actually using like an NTML hash, or passing the hash, or credentials, or anything like that. And so that's what we're trying to do. So as long as I find one that's enabled and one that's tied to domain controllers, using a certify command, I can go and get a certificate, which then again, with the petit potome and responder, I'm relaying that NTML hash again. And I am getting that certificate information. And once I have the certificate, then I can use that and the private key, because it is integrated in an Active Directory domain services as an alternative authentication method. So once I actually have that, then I can just take that key and forward it over, and now I have all the pieces, running a certify, the PFX key, and I can get the NT hash which instead of having a relay, I can just pass the hash, and as you can see here, I'm getting the NT hash for the administrator on the domain corp.local. And so at this point in time, I actually was the domain admin hash, and so I had domain access to everything. So this is the remediation stuff. That attack's much more involved, so I went a little bit more into it with everything. But yeah, so certificate authority web enrollment and certificate enrollment web services. If they aren't needed in your organization, you can uninstall them. They aren't needed in a lot of situations. If you can't uninstall them and maybe it's needed, but it's only needed for limited things, use an allow list and a deny list and limit the access to those services. There's also an extended protection of authentication for ADCS, and there's different ways to do that. So the steps to actually do these things are much more involved. If you want to screenshot a picture of that, searching this type of information will get you closer to finding the full list. I was not going to put the full list of information in the slides for these ones. Additionally, you can disable NTML authentication on window domain controllers and ADCS services. So if you remember, everything we started with was just getting an NTML hash and then being able to relay it. So as an alternative method, the other steps would be good to take care of too, but this would make it harder because I'd have to find a different way to get that NTML hash to do these things. And so the whole thing is trying to make my job harder. We're hackers, we're inventive, as we talked about this morning and everything. We will try to find a different solution to the problem. But the more ways you make it harder and the more ways you make it secure, the better it is for you guys. And hopefully it'll reach the point where it's hard enough that the hacker's just like, this isn't worth my time and leave. But yeah, so that is ADCS. So, common attack path. This is the review of the second one. Windows null sessions, we were able to enumerate users with that. And then we performed a password spray. With the password spray, we were able to find some user with weak passwords. And then because the user had weak passwords, we were able to perform an ADCS attack, which was the whole attack vector that we talked about, using getting the administrator NTLM hash, forwarding it to the certificate authority, and then back. And then we are able to actually get domain access to the whole entire domain. So that is the two most common attack vectors that I've seen a lot used by me and my coworkers, colleagues, right? Because it's not just in Rapid7. And one of them, ADCS, I feel like has become a lot more popular over the last year and so. The other one has been popular since I was in college. So that's one that's still existing out there that if we could do better at, that'd be great. So next thing we're talking about is a little bit of security in depth. So everyone should be pretty used to this, security in depth. You need to have layers of security, blah, blah, blah. You're used to this. I'm not going to do the whole spiel for you guys there. But we will talk about a little bit of variations and why security depth is important. So let's say that you get approval and you get to turn LMNR and MBNS off, and then you also make sure you have SMB signing turned on for all your machines. Great, that is fantastic. If I can still enumerate users and then password spray, and your users have weak passwords, and then one of those users have local admin access, you haven't really stopped anything yet. Or let's say that you made sure all your users have very limited access and everything. You can go vice versa. If I can man in the middle, because you didn't fix that, cache LMNR, and then do an SMB relay, and then I can potentially connect that through and use that user's hash and credentials or anything to be able to start connecting and doing an ADCS attack. Another option too is if you get SMB relay fixed because you made sure all the signing was required, but you have LMNR there and weak passwords, if I have LMNR running and I'm poisoning it, I'm getting hashes, I can take those offline, crack them, and then start using them in all the different ways as well too. Security in depth is important. You need those layers to be able to help against these variety of different scenarios. These were the two most common scenarios that I used, but there's multiple variations of them too. Windows null session is the one I use for this, but OSINT, people find people's usernames, then use Kerberoot to test the usernames against Kerberos and confirm which ones are valid. I mean, I have a file that I use that has, I think it's like 49,000 usernames, which are literally just generated from first letter, and they think it's like the 100 most common first names and the 100 most common last names. Because using that and using Kerberos, I get at least a handful of accounts every single time I've used that because maybe the company does have pretty good OSINT protection and various other things. And then if they do that, and they have bad passwords, then I spray, I get some creds, and again, it escalates and starts spiraling and going down there. So security in depth. We honestly have an easier job than you guys. We don't have to, I mean, we try to think of all these scenarios to try to help you guys as much as we can, but you guys have the multiple layers to put in protection. I mean, I did blue hat security and incident response for years. And so that job is a lot harder because we can find a different way to wiggle here and wiggle there, and that's why we're trying to help with being able to find these ways and let you know where some of those key points are. So that's why I'm trying to relay the two most common attack vectors. So blue team, red team, while we are pen testing, we are quote unquote opposite sides, but really we're all on the same side here. More often than not, if I'm pen testing a company that has really good security, I'll let them know, like, yeah, when I have a red team hat on, I am frustrated as hell because you did all this security here, or like you blocked this step here, so I had to like figure out a way to go around here, and like, it is so frustrating. But the moment I'm done, it's just like put on my blue team hat. It's just like, you guys did a really good job here. You guys did a really good job there. And it's great to see when those things are happening. With my red team hat on, it can be frustrating as heck, but we're all really on the same team here. As long as you're not black hat. If you are, go away. But we're all really on the same team here, and we're all trying to help each other out. So during the engagement, yeah, we maybe are on other sides and everything, but we're really just partners trying to help each other out here. Okay, so if I remember right, I got like 10 minutes left, right? Yeah? Okay, perfect. That's where I tried to hit it. Cool. So I don't know if I'll be able to answer them, but if anyone has questions, red teaming engagements, various variations, or anything like that, I did try to leave around 10 minutes of questions so people could ask. Yes, and I'll repeat the question. And if not, we can also get out of here early and change. So it's up to you guys. Yep.
When you do a test for a client, when you come back and find out, hey, you're not really vulnerable in front of exploits. It's just a ton of really bad legacy misconfigurations, and that's very heavily based off of results. How easy is it to convince people to change those legacy services? Do people pre-resist to this? Because after you've proven it, it's already there. So will they change it usually, or?
It depends a lot on uppers management's view, which you try to do your best to change. So like in our reports or like in our debrief calls, sometimes like if I see LMNR in BNS and the whole entire time I'm there, I don't catch any hashes, right? Because while I see the traffic, none of the traffic's running creds or anything like that, so I can't really poison and catch that because there's not those type of connections being made. I will highlight in the debrief call, it's just like, while I did put this in as low risk because no credentials were found, if creds were found, this is what could have happened. And to let them know, because the other thing is, while we are in a time box test as pen testers, so we're limited on time, resources, and things like that. Like I've done a 3-day internal where I was really frustrated because I got creds, no, I didn't get creds. I got hashes through LMNR, and I was relaying, but the relaying was having some issues, and so finally when I got to relay, the creds that I kept catching didn't have the access, which could be great and fantastic, and maybe they actually had it set up where like it was a legacy system, so it couldn't have the access it needed for us to be relayed to be able to do a proper connect and everything like that. If that's proper, great. If it just happened to be no one was in the office this week, and then everyone else had creds, then potentially it's a huge vulnerability for them still. So we include those in the report. We also do an assessment storyboard to try to highlight, like, these are the things that we found and potentially could go, and you discuss that in the debrief call to let them know, like, because we're in a time box test, but if I'm a hacker, I'll just let that stuff run the whole time in the background and see, and eventually, like, if I get one domain admin on there that's running at that time, oh, do I need to move over here for a camera or something? Sorry. Then, yeah, if the one domain admin once is enough to be able to get creds and everything. So, I mean, there was one company that I spent the whole entire time not getting domain user or anything like that, or domain admin and trying to get creds, which was super frustrating for me. And then I think it was the next year, I had them again, expecting slightly the same results. Domain admin happened to get on because they didn't really change everything, even though we recommended it. And domain admin happened to get on the first day, and I had completely pwned them at the end of it. So it's like, just because legacy things are there and we don't catch it during the pen test, we're limited on time, doesn't mean that the vulnerability and the way to spiral down isn't there.
When you catch it, and then you put that in the report, do they change it down the line? If you do it down the line, or most of the time?
Generally speaking, if we do catch it and stuff, they at least try to put some safeguards and everything like that. We'll try to find ways around it, or maybe a different way in. But generally speaking, from what I've seen, they do try to do what they can to fix it. Any other questions? I think we got, yeah, we still got time. Yeah.
How effective is labs at mitigating the local administrative agents?
Labs?
Local administrative password service.
Okay. How effective is LAPS, LAPS, local admin protection service, right? At mitigating the local admin rights? Honestly, I'm not used that very much on my blue teaming side, so I can't really answer on that one. My guess would be that if it's there and it's a tool, hopefully it helps, but people find ways around things. So it's always got to be careful with that. And sometimes exceptions are put in, and if exceptions are put in, maybe those exceptions don't need to exist down the line, so that's one of the reasons why auditing user controls fairly regularly is important too. Any other questions? I keep looking down because the lights they have there are so bright. I'm not trying to avoid looking at you guys. Okay. I'm not seeing any hands, so if you have a hand, hoot and holler. Sweet. I think we'll get out 5 minutes early because I don't like holding people beyond what they're needed. So if you guys have more questions, you don't want to raise your hand, I'll be here. So feel free to come up. Thanks.